Welcome to Crime Most French, a weekly podcast taking you through intriguing cases carried out on French soil. Researched and narrated by Cedric and rudely interrupted by me, Melanie. We're the True Crime Podcast on the Lions. Crack open le vin and let the mayhem commence.
The episode this week is a doozer. It's the story of Henri-Désiré Landru, who was born in 1869 and died in 1922. He is known as the first French serial killer, which can be debated. There has been people in history who have killed other people. Gilles de Rais is an example that comes to mind. He's known for having killed a large number of kids, but never proven really, but he was still executed for it. His way of getting money, because he was short of money, was to pretend to be a widower with kids, and he would attract mostly widows and rob them, and most of the time kill them. He was exacting his murders mostly after the end of the First World War, but started just before it ended. He would rent houses and attract women to these houses, rob them and kill them.
So we're talking about he was a black widow. He'd be luring in lonely women.
Yes. So Landru was born in 1869 in the north of Paris. His father, Julien Landru, was 34 at the time. He will eventually commit suicide in Wat Boulogne, which is southwest of Paris, on the 28th of August 1912. His mom, Flore Henriquel, from maiden name, was also 34 at the time. Landru has an older sister, Florentine. He has a happy childhood. You can't blame his childhood for his actions. He's also fairly gifted as a child. He's noted for his abilities for drawing and mathematics. He goes to a Catholic school most of his childhood. He's a choir boy, and his parents consider sending him to the seminar, so the priest school.
I always thought it was considered very much you send the poorer academically gifted kid to the seminary rather than the gifted child who would be a lawyer or a medic. Is that not necessarily the case in France?
It's usually the youngest you send to preschool.
Ah, okay.
The oldest inherits the family's business, and the youngest goes to the seminar because he can't get anything from the family, so
okay.
He give it to God.
Okay.
He wants to become an architect, but fails. He only manages to be hired as an architect assistant in 1889. He lies to Marie-Catherine Rémy in 1889 as well, pretending to be a technician in an architect's office to seduce her. After 3 years of military service, where he becomes sergeant, they get married and they have 4 kids. So that's his wife. From 1890 to 1900, he practiced many jobs. He was a plumber, a roofer, an accountant, a map maker, etc., etc. He did anything really. He also has 15 different employers. Clearly, at that point, he can't hold a job.
CV with 15 jobs? Well, it's sending out red flags. You're never going to be called in from any interviews at that point.
15 jobs in 10 years, yeah. That doesn't look good. That is the source of his financial problems, because he can never go up the ladder, so he always ends up having basic jobs and doesn't stay very long. So when the 4 kids are born, they're also a drain on the family's finances, so that's the problem starting. To solve his problems, he starts various scams. The first one is he organizes a national ad campaign for motorized bicycles, which we would now call mopeds.
Okay.
Small bikes. He sets up sales and requests 1/3 payment up front. Lots of orders come in because it's all new and shiny and fun, so people want them.
Yeah.
But he neglected one thing. He didn't invest anything in making them. So once he has enough money, he just disappears.
Wow.
With all the money and none of the bicycles built.
Wow.
So that's his first scam. He does it for having money for the family, but at the same time, he's conflicted because he considers it his first failure. He feels like he's let down by the whole world.
Oh, of course.
From there, he goes from scam to scam and gets sentenced several times, so he's not really good at getting away with it. He serves 2 years in prison in 1904, 13 months in 1906. After a suicide attempt in his cell, he manages to leave the prison thanks to the testimony of psychiatrists who judged that although he's not crazy, he's not entirely right in the head, so he gets out of prison that way.
Okay.
Which is kind of strange.
Yeah. Would he not be sent to the equivalent of Bedlam?
No, he would probably be let out of prison but sent somewhere. But at the time, that's just, okay, you're crazy.
He'd be given a court-appointed therapist, I guess.
Yeah. So in 1909, he's sentenced to 3 years in prison, again, for having got engaged to Jeanne Isoré, having made her transfer all her savings to his name and then disappeared.
And also still being married as well. So a bigamist.
Yes, also still being married and also not very good at getting away with it. As soon as he's out of prison, he runs a new scam. He buys a garage and then he sells it immediately. But at the same time forgetting to pay the first owner. So he's quickly identified as the scammer. He goes on the run. In 1914, he's sentenced in absentia to 4 years in prison. As it's the third sentence, for more than 3 months sentence, he is sentenced to hard labor in Guyana.
Ooh, out to Papillon.
Yes, again, that's the second time at least we mentioned that in the podcast. It's possible, but not certain, that sentence was the trigger that pushed him to murder, because knowing that if he's caught, he's going to end up in Guyana, knowing that the survival rate is extremely low and not for long, he decided that he might as well just do whatever he wants and he has nothing else to lose, really.
Well, if his mental health can't take a prison in France, it's certainly not going to be able to handle the hard labour and just the climate of Guyana. I mean, that's just too much.
Also, it's not hard labour, so it's not just spending the day in a cell. It's hard labour. You're sent out in the heat to break stones.
Yeah.
So yes, at that point he decides he might as well kill his victims. There's no point leaving them alive, because if he's caught and he's dead. So all he needs to do is really not being caught and not being recognized.
So basically what he's doing is clearing up the evidence.
Yes, he makes the evidence disappear by killing the victims.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And we're in 1914 at that point, so forensics are non-existent, apart from finger marks, like Murdoch calls it. So yes, essentially if you kill your victims, you won't be caught.
Okay.
And at the time, remember we saw a documentary about it, if you didn't have a body, you didn't really have a crime. It happens after that you could prove a crime without having the body.
Yeah, that's under English law. I don't know if the same as for French law.
I suspect it was the same, because if you didn't have somebody you could show was dead, then how can you prove there was a crime? Without forensics, you couldn't do anything about it. So it was probably the same. That was his strategy at that point. That was that. He then starts pretending to be a widower. He pretends to be well off so that the victims are not clued to something wrong. And he targets women that are normally single or widows, but usually widows, isolated, and though not rich with a certain level of income. So he doesn't want to attract attention by killing very rich people, but they need to have enough money for him. So there's a balance to find there.
So you're talking more kind of middle class, Margot Ledbetter rather than landed gentry types.
Yes, because remember after the First World War, women were working. They were starting to work because they had to work because the men were at the war. So they were starting to earn money. And that's who he's targeting at that point. Women who had a good job, were making money, but weren't landed rich.
And I guess the pool of women who were on their own was a lot bigger because of the war.
Yes. There was a lot of choice and a lot of desperate women who were alone and wanted to live with someone.
Yes.
So he would attract them by offering them an easier life because he himself had money, so they didn't have to worry about this, and that's how he was attracting them first.
So very much like Raffles and Lupin, they're kind of like making themselves look like a desirable package, but whereas in fact it's just an empty shell.
Yes. So he attracts those women to isolated houses that he rents. He doesn't buy those houses because he doesn't want to leave too many traces. He changes house regularly to avoid suspicion because he doesn't want the neighbors to really start smelling something strange. And he usually rents houses that are as far as possible from neighbors. So for example, the house in Gambé I mentioned earlier when I said it was Barbe Bleu of Gambé, the nearest neighbor was 300 meters away. So it was far enough that nobody would really pay attention to what happens in the house, but close enough that people wouldn't be scared going there. So it's not like at the top of a mountain like Dracula's castle or something.
Where is it? No neighbours. Sounds idyllic.
Yeah. So the first one that he rented, he abandons because one day he was controlled on the train for his ticket, and he didn't have one. He had an out-of-date ticket, so he had to provide an address, and he provided the address of that house. And not wanting the police to get too close to the house for any reason, he just abandons it and finds another house.
He didn't think about giving a fake address?
Apparently not. But I guess he had to provide papers. It's not the UK, you have ID papers. I think it might be 1913, the start of ID papers in France. So you had to prove who you are, and he obviously had something proving that he was living in that house with him.
Fair enough.
As we said, World War I helps him a lot by leaving a lot of women on their own. And it helps him in a number of ways as well. Because of the war, the whole police and judiciary system is in tatters. So it is, at the end of the First World War, very easy to do illegal things and not get caught, because the police is non-existent. So that's the two ways in which the First World War helps him. He probably couldn't have done it earlier, and he couldn't have done it in the late 20s, for example, when things were going back to normal. But in that small window, from 1914 to 1920 or so, everything lines up perfectly for him to be able to kill people and never get caught.
Wow.
So his first victim is Jeanne Cuchet. She works in a textile factory and she's a widow. She's 39 and she meets him in February 1914 in Jardin de Luxembourg. So it's the Senate's garden in Paris.
If you're ever in Paris, I can't recommend visiting this place enough. Very, very lovely. All the locals go there. Check it out.
His next victims he finds through personals in national newspapers. He has a way of talking to women that kind of convinces them that he's the right person for them and they can trust him. So they normally fairly easily give him a power of attorney, and that's how he gets their money.
To me, this just sounds utterly crazy, but he must have been a very good talker.
Yes. But strangely, when you look at him, he looks crazy. So it's hard to see how women haven't been thinking, that dude is not for me. Because he does look really, really nuts when you look at him.
He does, to me, he reminds me of Rasputin's younger, slightly more kempt version.
Yes, he reminds me of Rasputin as well. Totally looks like Rasputin. At least the Rasputin we know from the Russian films from the 20s.
Of course, yes.
He uses about 90 different identities. When he has to provide proof for one of these identities, he pretends that it comes from the northeast of France, which is the territories that have been occupied by the Germans. So all the paperwork is gone.
Where there's most chaos and disarray in the country. Clever.
Exactly. So when he has to prove his identity, he says who he is, whatever the identity he's using at the time is, provides an address over there, and when they go and want to check, they're told that we have nothing. And he gets away with it.
That's very
What else
astute.
can you do? If your paperwork has been lost by the state, how can you do anything else? So they just say, okay, it must be you then. And that's how he gets away with it.
Very astute. Very astute.
So all he has left to do is make the bodies disappear when he kills people. So it is thought that he burns parts of the bodies of his victims in fireplaces in the houses he rents. Even in the last house he rents, which is in Gambé, which as I said was 300 meters from the nearest neighbor, his burning attracts some attention from the neighbors because they complain about the smell coming out of his chimneys. Because he's so discreet, he doesn't worry them, so they smell strange things, they complain about it, but they don't do anything about it. So he gets away with it for a while.
Well, that's the thing though, isn't it? Bodies, when they're burning, just don't smell like seasoned wood. They have fat and muscle and bone. It's just not something you would advocate, and that must lead to so much grease in the actual flues of the chimneys. Oh, that sounds utterly revolting.
Yes. Regularly he visits his actual family, but when he visits them he pretends to be a drunk dealer. So he gives them an explanation for the money he has. So he gives them some of the money and they're happy to get it and they don't ask questions.
So all of a sudden it's turned into Miami Vice.
Yes. Again, the state of the police and judiciary system helps him here because he can travel around the country. He can be listed as a criminal. He can be searched around the country because he's been sentenced to go to hard labor in Guyana. but he doesn't take a big risk because nobody actually does it. There was a modern psychologist who looked into his file and went through all the paperwork written by all the psychologists at the time who saw him in prison. And I didn't recall the name, but that psychologist thinks that World War I helped him in yet another way, a false way. It was by rationalizing what he was doing, because in his head, soldiers kill for a reason. Therefore, if he has a reason that's good enough, he can kill as well, and it's okay. And it's not the first person who does that and thinks that way. There's been other people doing exactly the same thinking in the Second World War. If there is a war, if it's okay to kill people under some circumstances, if I have the right circumstances, then I can kill people.
So you can manage to rationalise it and get a good night's sleep.
Totally. And the most famous one after the Second World War is Dr. Petiot, who was a doctor in Paris killing a lot of people as well. He's also a very big serial killer. And he was rationalizing in exactly the same way.
So no doubt we'll meet him at a later date.
We know that we'll meet him at some time, yes. How did the affair suddenly come to light? Because he's been killing a number of people, getting away with it. Why did it change? In 1918, the mayor of Gambé receives a letter from Madame Pella, who asks for news about one of her friends, Madame Coulon, who got engaged to Monsieur Dupont, living in Gambé, but she hasn't received any news of her since. So the mayor replies that he doesn't know these people, he's never heard of them, and that's it. Soon after, he receives another letter from Mademoiselle Lacoste, who asks news about her sister, Célestine Buisson, who got engaged to Monsieur Frémillet, living in Gambé. Again, the mayor doesn't know any of these people. So he's kind of surprised. That's two very similar letters in a very short amount of time. So he gets in touch with the two families and notices that their stories are essentially identical. To him, it sounds like Dupont and Frémillet are the same person. In both cases, the women have answered personals in the newspapers. One on the 16th of March 1915 in L'Écho de Paris, and the other one on the 1st of May 1915 in a newspaper called Le Journal. Mm-hmm. And they both somehow get engaged, both somehow end up in Gambé, and both somehow are totally unknown from people in Gambé, including the mayor. So he gets a bit suspicious. So the two families decide to join forces and press charges in Paris. They don't know exactly what's going on, but they go to the police and say, okay, both our stories are very similar. We both know people who have disappeared. You have to look into it. The inspector in charge of that case is called Jules Bellin. He learns that the house, called L'Hermitage, is owned by Monsieur Tric, who rents it to Monsieur Frémillet from Rouen. However, there is no Dupont or Frémillet in Rouen, but mail, which is sent to these people, is redirected to Monsieur Guillet, Bouvardnet in Paris, which is the address of Célestine Buisson.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
So one of them, Dupont or Frémillet, got engaged to Célestine Buisson.
Mm-hmm.
He comes from Rouen. He doesn't exist in Rouen, but mail sent to Rouen is sent to Célestine Buisson's address in Paris.
Okay.
But at that point, the investigation stalls because they have nothing. Nobody can find that person. Nobody knows that person. So it just dies for a little while. And that's until the 8th of May, 1819, when one of Mademoiselle Lacoste's neighbors recognizes the mystery man with another woman living in one of the china shops on Rue de Rivoli in Paris, because she went there and bought new plates. She alerts the police, and Jules Bellin, the inspector, manages to locate Lucien Guillet, thanks to the shop owner, because the shop owner was supposed to deliver the plates at some point. And they go to the address, which is Rue de Rochoir, on the 12th of April 1919, on the day of his 50th birthday. And who did they find there? Landru. And he's recognized as the dude from the shop.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly at that point they start connecting the dots.
So if he's faked his identity once, has he done it a lot more times?
It's better than that. He's found with a notebook with 12 names in it. 2 of the names are the 2 women that are searched, that have disappeared.
Never keep a murder book.
There's several stories about that book. One is that it was found with him in the flat,
okay,
and they looked into it and they recognized some of the names. Another one is that he was arrested with the notebook on him in his coat and tried to get rid of him by throwing it through the window, but failed, missed the window, and suddenly there was that notebook in the police car. And then they looked at it and they thought, oh, we know these names. And that's how they found out that notebook. But nobody really knows what the actual story is. But anyway, they do find a book. It contains the name of 2 of the victims, 10 more names. It's in fact the book that he was using to keep track of what he was taking from whom. He took money and other things from various women, and he was keeping track of what he had taken.
It was his murder accounting book.
He was his murder ledger.
Dumbass.
So at that point, the inquiry really starts because they have someone and they have a little bit of evidence. It reaches the newspapers, and from that point on, it's a big story around Paris. The police interviews many witnesses. Once they've discovered that he had lots of fake identities, it's a lot easier to find witnesses, and there are many witnesses who had no idea of the whole story. So the police learns about the various houses that Landru has been renting very quickly. They also learn about a number of garages that he was renting around Paris, but didn't have a car. When they searched his garages, they find lots of things that had been taken from the victims. The examination of his account books, because he was keeping very precise track of what he was stealing from various people, reveal a very large-scale marriage scam. So he at least contacted 283 women and kept track of all of them, mostly through the newspaper ads that he had. So they in fact contact him. Most of them don't become victims. They just don't match the criteria that he requires for making them victims. Usually it's because they're not isolated enough from their family, for example. So if they go missing and it's noticed very quickly. So he wants people who are going to go missing without anybody noticing for large amounts of time, so he has time to organize things and stuff. So most of these women don't qualify for that.
So you have to set a really wide net and then have enough of a catch to be able to pull out the minnows.
Yes, and that's why he advertises in national newspapers, not in local ones.
Mm-hmm.
And also, some of those women just don't have enough property for him to be interested. There's no point killing someone if you get nothing out of it. He's not like the first podcast, the gang that was sometimes getting away with nothing because they didn't do their intel right.
I think you can certainly tell the difference between them. They come across as being very rural country bumpkin types, whereas this guy he obviously was, quite a clever guy. It was systematic, a good method up to a point, obviously.
Yes. So in his books, there's 11 names that are known to have been names of women who have disappeared. And as a result, the judge, Bona, charges Landru for murder on the 19th of April 1919. At that point, the police start searching his houses and his garages and all that. And they discover, mainly in Gambé, that's the one he's used most for his murders, ashes in barns, for example, piles of ashes. But of course, at the time, they have no clue what it is. They can't identify what it is. They also discover bits of jewelry, partially burnt women clothes in the cooker. In the kitchen cooker.
Okay, in ranges.
They also collect 4.176 kilo of burnt bones. And according to the police, 1.5 kilo of these bones are human. They also discover 47 teeth. And the AMI at the time announces to the press that the bone fragments come from 3 heads, 5 feet and 6 hands.
Wow.
So there's several people there.
Yeah,
3 people. On the 28th of June 1919, inspectors Kling and Bale run an experiment. They burn the pig's head and a roast in the cooker in Gambé to see what happened. And it noticed that the cooker works really well. It burns the fat nearly perfectly. It leaves nothing behind. That's why there's only ashes left in that cooker.
Yeah.
So he obviously tweaked it so it can burn people and meat totally.
Yeah.
The police also discovers in garages rented by Landru furniture that belongs to the victims, because it appears that after he killed the women, he would go to their house and steal some of the furniture that's valuable from the house with the help of his son. His son not being in on it because he thinks that his dad is a furniture dealer, so it's normal that he bought the furniture from a dead person's house and then they collect what's interesting and put it in the garage. So he helps him, but he's not arrested or anything like that. Landru pretends that he's going to sell all that stuff at auctions like furniture dealers do. When they go through his accounting books more precisely, they discover that he bought many saws of various kinds and also a lot of charcoal. They also notice that the notes of the times when he bought those things matches the times when people died or disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, it's the 12th of April 1917 when Madame Babelet at 4 p.m. in the evening, he notes.
Mm-hmm.
On the 1st of September 1917, Madame Buisson at 10:15. So he notes the times he actually used all the stuff he bought. So we know he killed people at that point. So there's a whole list like that. And best of all, they discover train ticket receipts showing that he was traveling to the house in Gambé at those times when women disappeared as well. But he would buy a return ticket for himself and a single for the women that come with him.
Oh, wow, that's cheap. That is cheap.
Oh, it's not going to waste. So they have ashes, they have bits of body parts in the cooker, they have the furniture that was taken from the victims' houses, they have the list of his purchases in terms of saw and charcoal, when that was used, and the tickets that show that he was going to that house with the women, not coming back with them.
Mm-hmm.
So the police spend a lot of time trying to find all the victims because they don't know how many there are. The book containing 283 names could be 200 victims, so they have to look into all of them, and it takes a very long time, but eventually they find them all, except 12. 11 of them we know for sure are dead because they've been reported missing.
Okay.
12th one, nobody knows who it is. But he does mention a 12th victim in his trial. It just doesn't say who it is.
So they're the unfortunate dozen then.
Yes. So then the trial starts. All the instruction took 2.5 years. And when it starts on the 4th of October 1921 in Versailles, it's expected to be one of the largest trials ever. It takes many weeks. 125 witnesses are heard, and sometimes they run several sessions in parallel to try to go through the backlog fast enough. So you would have 2 courts running at the same time to go through all the witnesses.
Wow.
In the press, the trial is reported like a sitcom. So it's day to day what's been happening and the gossips and everything. They relate all the events and all the arguments in minute detail, and sometimes they publish whole transcripts of the court action deliberations and stuff. Also, the trial attracts crowds, massive crowds. There's photos of people queuing to get into the room because they want to be there, and it is the place to be seen for the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie at the time. You were supposed to be at the Landru trial, so they were all going there. So it was a very big thing at the time.
Oh, that's hilarious. The Bobos were rushing out to see the the murder and mayhem.
Yes. The trial starts with no formal proof because they haven't actually found a body. They found bits of bodies. But there is so much indirect evidence that even today you would consider it irrefutable proof. There's so much pointing at him killing people that you can't say, nah, it didn't happen, even if there's no body. It had to have happened.
Well, I mean, there's actual hard forensic evidence with the bones.
Yes, but how do you prove what bones connect to what person? That's the thing. You can't prove that he killed Madame whatever just because you found a tooth. At the time, you had no way to connect. So you can't prove that he killed the people he's supposed to have killed.
Well, you can certainly prove that he had been in contact with them, he had travelled with them, and he has a bit of their body.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. There's lots of indirect evidence that he's done it, but no actual hard proof that he did it because there's no bodies. But there's enough indirect evidence that you can't deny it. You can't seriously say, nah, I don't think he's done it. He has to have done it. At some point, the cooker is even brought into court to show the jury where he cooked or incinerated these people. But during the trial, he denies everything. He says, I didn't kill anyone. He accepts that he has robbed and scammed people, but he denies that he killed anyone. Also, the way he speaks and his humorous remarks really please the crowd. It's like a spectacle. At the time, it would be the equivalent of now going and to see a stand-up comedian.
Really?
It was like that. So, for example, when the bailiffs bring the list of jurors to him, he replies, it wasn't necessary to bother, especially on a Sunday, for so little.
Okay.
Also, when the president of the tribunal asks him, Monsieur Landru, all these women, didn't your children say anything? He replies, when I give orders to my children, they obey. They don't try to understand how or why. I wonder how you raised yours.
Ingratiating yourself.
Also, he said at some point, if women have something against me, they can press charges, being dead. His lawyer does the same thing. He plays to the court quite a lot. At some point he declares, all the women that my client is supposed to have killed have been found and will arrive soon. That's a total lie. The jurors look at the door because he's pointing at a door when he says that at the time. And he says, all those of you who have turned your head have demonstrated the lack of conviction concerning the reality of the crimes, the lack of evidence against Landru. You know it's not true. So he's tricking the jurors to try to make them admit that they don't believe what the tribunal says, just because he points at the door. So that reminds me of gloves. If it doesn't fit,
Yeah, you must acquit.
But the president was sharp as well. So when that happened, he replied, yeah, but Landru didn't turn his head.
Oh, hoisted by his own petard.
And given the number of clues, the number of witnesses, the number of books they found and notebooks and all that, his lawyer knows that there's a lost cause. There's no way he can save him. So after 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Landru guilty of 11 murders and sentenced him to the guillotine on the 30th of November 1921. The President of the Republic refuses to grace him when he asks, and gives his answer on the 24th of February. And when he's collected from his cell at 5:25 in the morning, the priest who comes asks him, do you believe in God, my son? And he replies, Father, I'm going to die and you play riddles. So clearly he's not even taking it seriously at that point. So he's guillotined in front of the prison in Versailles on the 25th of February 1922. The executioner is Dibbler. We've heard of him in the first episode.
Oh yes,
The state, I think, had only one executor at a time, and that's one of the very famous ones. And the last one as well.
He must have been well-travelled and kind of busy.
Yes, oh, he had assistants and everything. It was a big job.
Ooh.
His lawyer asked him just before his execution if he wanted to confess to the murders, and all he replied was, oh, all that is my baggage.
Okay.
So doesn't say really anything, doesn't really care. So he's buried in a cemetery in a grave with only a wooden cross and his first name. Apparently it was the custom at the time. When you're executed, you don't have your surname on your cross, you have only your first name.
But you can be buried on consecrated ground.
Apparently at that point, yes. And after 5 years, his family doesn't claim the remains, so the bones are removed, and we don't know where they are now, they're just gone. During his prison stay between 1919 and 1922, he receives over 4,000 letters from women and 800 marriage requests.
So basically, he's the French Ted Bundy.
He is. That is called hybristophilia, from the Greek hybrizon and philia, meaning having sexual interest in someone who committed crimes. So that was a thing already at the time.
Yeah, that's just weird.
That's the end of the story. After all that, a woman came forward called Fernande Segret, and apparently she got married to him at some point. She was his wife when he was arrested. So I didn't find that if he had been divorced or widowed before that. I suspect he was a bigamist at that point, but nobody checked. She said during the inquiry that he tried to poison her twice. But she sued a filmmaker in the 60s for defamation when a film was made about Landru, and she got 10,000 francs in damages.
Wow. Because
she was mentioned in the film. And on the anniversary of the day Landru asked her to marry her, on the 21st of January, 1968 at that point, she jumped into the moat of a castle near the retirement room where she lived.
Crazy.
And in her room, when they cleared it after she was dead, they found 2 photos, one of her mother, one of Landru. And there's been lots of books and songs and films made out of this story over time, and it's probably one of the most famous cases in France. Everybody will have heard of Landru. Everybody will know that name. Not necessarily the details, but everybody will know that's a dude that's killed lots of people and is pure evil. And that's the end of the story.
And the moral of the story is always be careful where you keep your murder book.